AIG, Citigroup, Bank of America, and all the other big financial firms whose irresponsible actions led to the current economic meltdown were all Sarbanes compliant. Now, there are certainly other factors limiting startup formation and growth, both in the U.S. and Europe. Over the past decade, for example, restrictive immigration rules have reduced the number of this is especially a U.S. problem, talented scientists and engineers that come to work in our countries and start businesses. According to SRI's Carlson, 3 out of 4 bright Chinese engineering students who used to stay in the U.S. after graduation are now going back home. And this issue, the global battle for talent, represents a 5th challenge to our innovative ecosystem. While the U.S. and some European countries who are are reducing the number of brilliant scientists and engineers who are allowed to work and study in our countries, Singapore, for one, is going exactly the other direction, actively seeking them out and hiring that talent with generous salaries, research grants, and freedom to innovate as they wish. And finally, a 6th challenge confronting our innovation ecosystem is the increasing cost, inefficiency, and unreliability of our nation's IP systems. And mostly, this is a patent discussion. The American Patent and Trademark Office now takes an average of 3.5 years to issue a patent, and many take longer, despite the stated goal of deciding patent applications within 18 months. Indeed, the total number of patent applications waiting for approval in the U.S. is now 1.2 million, triple the number at the start of the decade. My friend Dave Kapos has his work cut out for him. How does that hurt startups? I can do this best by example. A small biotech firm called Matralab, which developed a wound-healing gel based on a technology it licensed from the University of Wisconsin in 2002. This company won the Wisconsin Governor's Business Plan contest and was led by an entrepreneur with 25 years' experience in biotech. But because it couldn't get its patent application approved in reasonable time, it was unable to attract new investment as needed to commercialize its product. Potential investors wanted to be assured that its startup had some level of exclusivity. So in 2007, Matralab went belly up 5 years after it filed its patent application. Patent Office did eventually issue the patent 7 years after the application was filed, 2 years after the company went bankrupt, and too late to save a promising new health innovation. According to Jim White, a patent attorney and former patent examiner familiar with this case, the story is repeated thousands of times. Now, in Europe, meanwhile, the growing cost and inefficiency of the patent system also stifles inventors and entrepreneurs. According to The Economist, it can cost between 4 and 10, I can tell you this from paying the bills, it can cost 4 and 10 times more to get a patent in Europe than in America, Japan, China, or Korea. And even if a patent is granted, it then must be validated, translated, and annually renewed in each country in which the firm wants protection. This burden was reduced somewhat last year by an agreement under which countries can waive the right to have patents translated into their national language, but so far, only 14 of the 30 or so countries have agreed to do so. And what's more, since litigation happens on a national basis, a court in one nation can overturn a patent granted by the EPO or uphold a patent invalidated by it. Of course, in Europe at least, we must also look to the growing wave of anti-IP sentiment, as evidenced in Sweden, a great example, by the Pirate Party and electing a member of the Pirate Party to the European Parliament, for whatever good that does, as an additional issue. I understand there's a counter-conference to this one being held in Gothenburg as we speak. Intellectual property is a critical component in the innovation mix, in my opinion. In fact, IP is quite simply the greatest stimulus to innovation and economic growth ever designed by man, if we thought about it rationally. We know, for example, that IP-protected technology innovation accounts for half of the growth of many Western economies, the U.S. included. Wherever IP protections exist, they also produce an average increase in R&D investment of more than 6%. And in today's globalized knowledge economy, the trade in ideas is now growing at twice the rate of the trade in goods. In every country studied, rich or poor, Economists have found that it is not capital resources or infrastructure or education per se, but rather the strength of a country's IP system that is the primary spur to technological investment and growth. As one well-known study put it, in the absence of strong IP rights, the leading countries have insufficient incentive to invent, and the follower countries have excessive incentive to copy. So what do? Well, I certainly wouldn't presume to offer the answers to all the innovation challenges we face, but if we look at the innovation ecosystem as a kind of soup, we can see that we need to have certain key ingredients: venture investment, government support for research, talented scientists and engineers, reliable IP protection, balanced regulations that encourage rather than discourage the formation of innovative startups, and last but not least, an entrepreneurial culture if we want to cook up a healthy innovation environment. So let me focus on some modest proposals. One, government do's and don'ts. Laissez-faire economists may not like to admit it, but government support has long been essential to advances in technology and to the development of new industries and broad-based jobs and income growth. In my country, government support has been an essential to the growth of the railroad industry 150 years ago, as it was to the emergence of the semiconductor, aerospace, and internet industries during the last 40 years. Much of this is through sponsored and funded federal support of university research. The list of successes are impressive. Just a few companies: Google, Netscape, Genentech, HP, Polaroid, Lycos, Sun, SGI, Amgen, Cisco, etc. It is estimated that 400 university startups come to fruition each year through federal government R&D funding in the United States. But that said, we must make a distinction between government support for basic and applied research and government intervention in the marketplace through mandates and technology preferences. The first, government support, works beautifully. The second, government intervention, usually leads to disaster. I'll give you two examples. Those of you who've been around a while will remember the original HDTV proposals that came out of Europe and Japan. Huge billion-dollar funded efforts. Those were analog proposals. They were trumped by a digital effort by a little company called General Instruments back in the early 90s, which came up with this digital model at the 24th hour. And of course, you can argue that that basically was the spur to this whole digital infrastructure that we had today. As you might expect, the analog model that was picked by the governments was a total failure. Now, the U.S. Has its own examples of this national champion kind of an idea. In the late 80s, and I was, I have to admit, a part of this effort, we were hypersensitive and scared to death over the Japanese, quote, new economic model and the ascendancy of the Japanese semiconductor industry, and a great concern that the U.S. was going to lose that industry entirely. So we funded, to the tune of then $500 million, which today would be significantly more, an effort called Semitech, which involved 14 U.S. semiconductor companies and, as I said, a lot of money from the feds to come up with the next generation of semiconductors. The result of that was not a damn thing, except a whole lot of money spent. Second suggestion is with a snappy little title called Brain Drain or Brain Gain. I appreciate the fact that the U.S. and Europe are struggling with increased immigration issues as we speak. Obviously, a tough economic time makes that even worse. But we ought to agree that for any country that wants to be an innovation leader, attracting the world's most talented people should be a no-brainer. Instead of driving such people away, we should be hanging borders on our signs on our borders that say entrepreneurs and geniuses wanted. In the United States, we are doing just the opposite right now. The third would be to reward but not punish risk-taking. I don't know why it seems so difficult for politicians and policymakers to distinguish in their regulatory plans between big companies and financial institutions whose behavior can affect the whole ecosystem